Emergency, which service?
When you think about our emergency services, what do you usually picture? Is it our police officers responding to a crash with their blues and twos? Maybe an ambulance of paramedics rushing to a medical emergency? Or do you see firefighters sliding down a pole and racing to their bright red fire engine? But how often do you think of the people answering our 999 calls? I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, we're marking International Control Room Week, celebrating all our operators who help us here. They're the ones who are sending a police car racing to that crash. They're the ones helping you give critical care to a patient until the paramedics arrive. And they're the ones briefing the fire crews on exactly how to get to the scene of a blaze. They're the people you hope you never have to speak to, but who you'll be grateful for if you ever do. Here on the Isle of Man, we have the Emergency Services Joint Control Room, where a small team of operators handle all the calls for all of the emergency services. Greg Norton is its operations manager, and he's been telling me how it works.
We take emergency 999 calls, we triage them, we provide advice to the callers, and we dispatch and coordinate the response for the emergency services.
And it's a bit of a different setup to the UK, isn't it? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, compared to the UK, all the 999 calls come direct through to here. There is no operator in between us and the 999s. Obviously in the UK, the operator who would take the 999 would ask emergency which service and then would put it through to the relevant control room for that service. But again, in here, we do all of that here. We ask emergency which service, and then we'll process it through the relevant software and through the relevant questioning processes to determine all the information that the emergency services need for their response, and then we'll dispatch that to them as well. So that can all be ongoing by colleagues whilst the call is incoming to make sure that the response is as quick as possible.
So the people working here really do need to have quite a broad range of knowledge to be able to respond effectively, don't they?
Yes, they're arguably some of the most qualified operators in the world in that they can operate for all three services and they're dispatching as well as call taking. So being able to switch between those topics and those subjects is a massive task, and it takes that amount of knowledge and skill to be able to do that.
And I would assume that there's a perception that the Isle of Man, there's only 85,000 people here. It's quite a quiet island for the most part, particularly comparatively to our UK neighbours. Is that the same picture that you have of the Isle of Man here?
We have all the same problems that go on in the UK, whether that's medical issues, whether that's crime issues, or whether it's fires. It's all to scale. So the difference is, whilst the UK might have a lot more of these incidents, they have a lot more resources that they can deal with. We don't. So our control room might take a lot less jobs than a UK control room, but we have a lot less operators to deal with it. So comparatively, we're as busy as they are, just with less resources. And again, it's the same for the emergency services. They can't call on help beyond the island and get a quick response. Whereas in the UK, if Merseyside run out of police officers due to a big incident, they can call on neighbouring jurisdictions to support them. We can't do that, so we have to rely on ourselves and be independent as much as we can.
Have you found that in recent years the number of calls that you're responding to is going up?
Yes, on the whole, the number of calls we deal with has risen dramatically, but it's not just us that's experiencing that rise. That's a global rise, especially with ambulance calls. Their rise since before COVID has been quite dramatic, and we're looking at different ways that we can help and support the ambulance service to deal with that, like with the introduction of clinical navigator, who can help make sure that the right resource is going to the right job without overusing resources.
So presumably it's not a job that you can just walk off the street and straight into and be able to do straight away. There's an awful lot of training that goes into this before you're even able to get into the control room itself.
Yeah, it's about a 3-month training programme that we undertake with new operators, and they go around the emergency services. They do various different attachments during those 3 months, as well as some intensive training on the systems that we operate on. And then at the end of those 3 months, that's when you'll go into mentored shifts where you'll be expected to start taking calls. And that's obviously the nervous moment for them. But from that point, the learning curve is steep, but it's supported. And it will probably take them another 9 months till they start to feel comfortable doing the job on the day-to-day basis. But during that time, they've got colleagues and support around them, and if they need that help, all they have to do is ask for it, and we'll try and guide them to get them to that stage where they're comfortable.
It's becoming more and more common to hear stories from the UK showing how much demand on the emergency services is increasing. The wait for help is getting longer, it's getting harder to work out who's most in need of help when there's a queue of critical calls waiting, and in some places, ambulances are queuing outside hospitals to get their patients help. But what's it like here? Glenn Corlett is one of the supervisors of the ESJCR.
Demand sometimes outstrips what we have resource available wise, which is why we have the triage systems in place. And that's mainly the biggest challenges on that side of it, is to make sure that we do get help to those people in the right time frame, whether it be police, fire or ambulance, because obviously as a tri-control room, we've got all three services that we deal with. So that's the biggest challenge. And obviously during busy periods, it's a bit like spinning plates, but it's a nice challenge.
And thankfully here on the Isle of Man, the picture isn't the same as it is in the UK in terms of the height of demand on services, but it's certainly increasing as the message that I'm hearing from people here. Would you agree?
Yeah, we do get times where there is not a backlog, but it's busier and it might take us a little bit longer to get things put through to people. Again, the triage system is exactly there for that purpose. We're not as bad as some hospitals or NHS trusts in the UK where they've got 20 vehicles at their A&E bay waiting to sort of go in. We're not at that stage, thankfully. And the same with the police and fire in terms of resources. It is busier, but we've got things in place to be able to sort of get the right things done at the right time. So hopefully there shouldn't be too much impact on people.
Because do you ever find that by some sheer chance you've got 3 Cat 1s that have come in and you don't have enough resources to send to them? Is that something that ever happens?
We can have jobs that come in where we end up with a bit of a queue. The Category 1 jobs, for example, are obviously the highest category that we can have for ambulance calls. We have ambulance duty officers that are always on call, so the decision doesn't always end with me as a supervisor, thankfully. A lot of the time we can find extra resources. We have community first responders on duty who are volunteers. We have staff standby. We've got staff that are also up at ambulance headquarters as well. So if needs be, we can normally get resources out at a bit of a, not a last minute thing, but sort of we can normally find a resource to go to it. So we haven't been completely caught out.
Can you hear me? SOS. Help me put my mind to rest.
So thankfully, here on the Isle of Man, things aren't so bad, but demand is definitely increasing. Nick Kaiser has been an operator at the ESJCR for 20 years. He's been telling me how he's seen things change in that time.
In 20 years, I've obviously done quite a lot of call handling here. We take everything from people having accidents to little old ladies who just need help. It's a very wide scope for what we do.
20 years is a long time to be doing a job. What is it that keeps you coming back day after day?
For me, it's knowing that I'm making a difference, helping people. Every day is different, and knowing that you've helped someone in their time of need is great solace for me.
And I was speaking to you and Greg earlier about the number of calls you're getting. In the 20 years that you've been here, have you seen an increase? Oh yeah,
the call rate that we handle now has definitely gone up in the last 20 years. Police and ambulance jobs especially so. More people are finding it harder now and need that assistance.
Do you think when you're dealing with calls particularly, is there any sort of common theme that a lot of them follow that you seem to answer a lot of, or is it literally just you have no idea when you pick up the phone?
When that phone rings initially, we have no idea what it's going to be. As for a theme, an increasing amount of our work comes down to mental health issues. We're getting rather a lot of those. But equally, it's people who just need help.
And mental health can sometimes be challenging as well, I suppose, because then you're having to really use your experience to know which emergency service is the right one for that situation as well?
Yeah, a lot of it goes to police for assistance. You know, people phone up and obviously they're very low, so they're wanting help. We do have the option of getting the hospital involved. They have a team over there which can deal with mental health, which we can phone. But we also get a lot which go through to the ambulance service, where they will go and assess a patient to see exactly what their needs are and how they need help.
It's one of those jobs where you are dealing with people in that immediate moment of crisis, and a lot of times I suppose you probably don't find out what's happened to that person or the people that you've been speaking to or dealing with. How does that impact you, or does it?
Yes, it's very hard initially talking to someone on the phone. You're only getting the mental image of what's happened, whereas someone on scene can actually see what's happened. So we're making up in our heads what people are describing to us. So that's quite hard, and it can have a toll on us. It's just very hard sometimes on us, particularly hard calls, you know. So we do need assistance sometimes when we find that it affects us.
International Control Room Week, what does that mean to you?
For me, it's a recognition of what we do. It's good to see that we are actually acknowledged. A lot of people know police, fire, ambulance, even the Coast Guard. Very few people actually think about the people behind who they're calling initially before the cavalry comes over the hill. So as far as we're concerned, being recognised is really good. And people are thinking more about us now. They acknowledge that there are people who they can phone and will speak to initially before you get the services arrive.
Emergency, which service? Where do you want the ambulance? What's the phone number in case we get cut off? Okay, is the patient breathing? Are they awake? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
I'm Amy Griffiths, and on this episode of Island Life, we're marking International Control Room Week, celebrating all our operators who help us here. As demand on the service is increasing, one thing that's been done to try and help cope is the introduction of clinical navigators to the control room. They're trained paramedics, and when a call about a medical incident comes in, they assess what kind of response it needs, whether that be signposting to another service or an immediate response from an ambulance. Gail is one of those clinical navigators and has been telling me more about the role.
So after the call takers have taken the 999 call, it will be classified as either a Cat 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Cat 1's your serious life-threatening emergencies, Cat 2 as well. Cat 3 or above will come to me, and I will then ring the patient back and talk to them and ask them questions and find out a bit more about what's going on. And then they may well still need an ambulance, so that will be dispatched, or they can be referred to the GP, minor injuries, or make their own way to hospital. So there's all sorts of different options. You don't just get an ambulance straight away.
So I suppose that's to help just establish exactly what requires an emergency response and what perhaps isn't as urgent.
Yeah, basically. So some jobs will come through as a lower category, but actually on speaking to the patient, they're quite poorly. So then that will get upgraded, and they'll have an ambulance coming on the blue lights and sirens. And in the other way, I could speak to a patient and they're not as poorly as they initially sounded to the call takers, and so then I can redirect them to better care that's more appropriate for them.
And it's quite a new role. So how long have you been doing this for?
It will be 2 years in February. I was a paramedic. I am a paramedic still. I've been in the ambulance service for nearly 22 years, and then this new role came up and I thought it was quite interesting. So,
and having seen both sides of it then, are you finding that having this role really makes a difference to make sure that you're responding to the right people in the right way at the right time?
Definitely, 100%. It's not necessarily that you're going to get an ambulance all the time, and it's re-educating people, but making sure that people get the right care at the right time and the right place.
Because I think there's a lot of emphasis that's put on to making sure that you do only call 999 in an emergency, but different people have a different interpretation of the word emergency and what's an emergency to them. So having this means that people can still feel validated if they call 999, and they can still feel like they have been helped.
100%, definitely. It's nice to help people. That, let's face it, you ring 999 in times of emergency and when you're panicking and struggling. So sometimes I can just reassure people that they have done the right thing, or if they didn't necessarily need an emergency ambulance, it's still not a waste of time because they've got the care they needed.
Being a paramedic then, what attracted you to that job and what has kept you in it for so long?
I think I'm just crazy. No, I love helping people, basically. Always have done. I think that's the caring side of me, I suppose. And I loved being on the front line, going out to people's houses and things like that, but I'm getting old now. And like I said, this role came up and it looked quite interesting, and I thought because I've been doing it since the beginning, so I kind of helped set it all up and things like that. It's really good. I think it helps.
Before this role came up, how aware were you of the control room itself and how it worked? Because obviously you'll be the one getting the deployments from control room, but you wouldn't have necessarily seen the inner workings, I'd imagine.
Yeah, no, not really. You speak to the people on the radio all the time, so it's nice to put faces to names. And so obviously you don't realise just how much does go on in here. And obviously we've got the police and the fire all in one, so it's interesting to see how busy they all are as well, and what goes on and how they see everyone dispatch ambulances and things like that. It's very interesting. Everyone works very hard.
So International Control Room Week, what does that mean to you, and what does it mean to you to work here in the control room now?
I think it's really good to recognise the hard work that people do. A lot of people would just go, they're just answering phone calls, but they don't. They do a lot more than that. They ask the right questions to make sure they get as much information as possible as to what's going on. And yeah, from my point of view, it's really interesting working up here, and it's really nice to see what everyone does.
So Gail is a clinical navigator responding to medical calls to the control room, and Sergeant Lee Wright does the same job but for the police. He's one of 5 Forces Incident Managers, or FIMs, and has been telling me more about his job.
So it's my job to review and manage all risk on any calls that come into the control room, and then sort of decide what deployment, what response we give it from a police perspective. So any calls for the police come through the control room, and it's the FIM's job to review those jobs and manage that risk and decide if it's an emergency response or if it can be dealt with over the phone call, etc., etc.
You're one of 5 people doing the role, and there's always somebody sat in that seat. So just how important is that?
Yeah, so he said, it's the main point of call for the police, and someone has to manage the role, the risk that comes with when people are calling for the police. As I said, people call us for all sorts of things, so it's very important that there is almost a gatekeeper to review that and make sure that the appropriate response is given to the call that's coming in. As such, that's why there's always someone in the control room. So there's 5 FIMs, and that's our core role. I'm one of the 5, and we're the full-time FIMs, but if any of us are ever on a course or leave or something, then another sergeant will be parachuted in to cover the role. But everyone who's done it has had the appropriate training to be able to sit in that seat.
And can it sometimes be challenging when there's multiple calls and you're trying to work out which is the bigger priority and who to send where based on the resources that you have? Can it be difficult juggling that sometimes?
Yeah, there is. You do spin a lot of plates in there because multiple jobs can come in at the same time, and it is, as I said, you've got to just review what's needed, how urgent that response is, and grade them accordingly, and then make sure that the right resources are dispatched to the jobs at the right time.
So how do you do that grading process?
So we have it's whether it's emergency response, which means people need to get there right now, or then we will look at something is there managing the threat and risk, is it ongoing now, is there ongoing risk of harm? If not, then it can be a delayed response. So then we might have police still need to attend, but they don't need to go on blues and twos. Or then there may be things that people are just calling for advice or just to report sort of matters to us. They can then be dealt with over the phone, either by a police officer or one of our first contact officers, which we have who work for the constabulary. So we sort of, as I said, it's that review process, manage it against the threat and risk, and then decide sort of what response is needed from it.
How do you find it? Do you prefer this side of things to sort of your maybe stereotypical side of policing, or is it a bit of everything that you enjoy?
It's different. It's, as you said, that's stereotypical of sort of being out and doing that. It's different. It's still exciting, and yeah, it's good because it's an important role that you've got. So there's a lot of faith is put into you to do this role. And
when you first started doing the role, what would you say the biggest surprise for you was about it, the thing that sort of shocked you most?
I guess from doing the role, because we're sat in, it's not a police building that we're in, so we sort of guest in the building because it's the communications division, it's their control room, working not with police staff. The FIM is the only member of police staff who's in the control room, and it's seeing how busy those guys are with not just assisting us with the police calls, but with the fire and ambulance. It's incredibly busy, and they do a great job.
So it sort of opened your eyes in some ways to just how much goes on in here.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's a busy little place.
So what is it like being one of the operators in the ESJCR? Wendy Hume has just finished her first year in the job. She's been telling me about her experiences.
Every call is different. Before you answer the phone, you've no idea what it's going to be. I think we're the only centre that actually deals with all three services. So it could literally be anything. The job is very varied. No day is the same. You never know what's going to happen. You could have, we call them queue days rather than, we don't say the quiet word. So it could be a queue day, or it could just be constant from the minute you get in to the minute you leave. It's just so busy. So yeah, there's an awful lot of activity on the island that I think really the public are protected. We do so much here. My eyes have been opened. I've only been here 12 months, and my eyes have been open to the activities that go on the island that you wouldn't ordinarily know about. It's very busy.
So you've been here 12 months. What made you want to come here, I suppose, in the first instance?
All my jobs, really, from starting work, have primarily been telephone-based. And I think when you think of telephone jobs, 999 to me has always been the pinnacle. I wouldn't say that I've always aspired to it. I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I'd be able to do it. And I have struggled because there's so much that you've got to learn. It's such a busy job, but I mean, I absolutely love it here, and everybody is so supportive. But yeah, definitely, I think 999 is the pinnacle of telephone-based jobs, so I'm really pleased that I'm here.
In terms of the amount that you have to learn, it's not just the basic training, it's also the systems that you use. I mean, doing a tour of the control room, everyone's got 3 screens, all with different things on each screen that they're constantly having to flick between and look at. So it's not a job for the faint-hearted, is it?
No, not at all. There's an awful lot that you have to think about and take into account. As I say, when you're going to answer that call, you've no idea what it's going to be, and there's no time to think, because when people call us, they're calling us because they're in an emergency situation. It doesn't matter which service they require. They're ringing because they're in an emergency situation. So your first, with me anyway, my first thought is to try and keep the caller calm. Because obviously, like if it's a medical call, they're seeing their loved one sick and they want help. So there's panic from the caller. So your priority is to try and keep it calm so that you can get the information that you require. When
I was chatting to some people on the floor, they were saying that there's a 3-month training period. You're then sort of mentored on the floor, but really, that's you answering calls from that point onwards. But that it takes around 12 months to really start to feel comfortable in the job. Are you starting to reach that point yet, or do you still feel like you've got some room to go before you start to really feel comfortable and confident?
Every day is a school day in here. I've been here about 15 months now. I'm learning every day. I still don't feel fully confident at what I'm doing. We have calls audited. We have training all the time. I've never worked in a role where training is so intense, and you can totally understand why the training needs to be intense. At the end of the day, we are securing a situation until the police, fire or ambulance arrive. So whatever the situation is on the call, that is our responsibility until they turn up. So the training is intense in here. Of course it is. You have to know what you're doing. But equally, I don't feel as though I work on my own. I've got 5 team members who I work with constantly. We work all together as a team. It's not a solo role in here.
So how much does that then help you in this role, knowing that you have those people that have your back, that you can rely on in those situations when it is going to be a multi-person effort?
I wouldn't be without any of the guys in here. Everyone is amazing. They're so supportive, and I think it is because you know that you can't do the job on your own. All it's going to do is slow things down, and time is of the essence, regardless of what the call is about. Everybody in here is amazing. Yeah, I love everybody.
The job itself, do you really enjoy doing the job as well?
Yeah, I do.
For the most part.
So I used to work at the taxis. I did that for a long time, off and on over the years, maybe 20 years off and on. And I loved it. And I always thought of myself as getting people home safe, you know, of a night, especially the way I used to work a lot of weekends. So especially on the weekend. Whereas now, I'm just hopefully I'm getting people safe, whatever their situation is. I'm a tiny little cog in the mechanics of getting that situation safe again.
But in an emergency situation, you're saving someone's life. You're not just keeping them safe, you're saving their life.
Yeah, that has. And there's also the other side where it's, you know, maybe not the best outcome, and having to deal with that as well is also a lot. It is a multifaceted job. There's just so much. As I say, no day's the same. Everybody in here loves their job. We love what we do.
I don't think you could do it if you didn't, could you?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those jobs. You've got to, your heart's got to be in it, definitely.
Would you recommend it as a job?
To the right people, yes, I would. It does take a certain kind of person, but yeah, it has to be for the right person. But yeah, definitely I'd recommend.
Wendy Hume there, sharing her experiences of being an operator in the Emergency Services Joint Control Room. It's safe to say it's not a job for the faint-hearted. So all this week, let's thank those working in the ESJCR for all the work they do to help keep us safe. I'm Amy Griffiths, and thank you for listening to Island Life. You can listen back to this programme and hear these interviews in full at manxradio.com or by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider.